So here is a schematic diagram that's sort of getting the gist of the different types of market structures that we've already evaluated and analyzed using our economic models that we've been developing, okay? And each of these little circles inside of the blue circles represent markets, okay? And the little yellow circles are meant to represent firms or consumers, individuals that are participating in the market. We go back to the beginning of the course. Remember that we talked about Smith and Jones coming together and trading apples and oranges. In that particular setup, this is what we were evaluating. We basically had one firm bringing a product to the market, oranges, and another firm bringing another product, apples. And then they were just considering how to trading apples for oranges with each other. So really, we had one seller of a good, like apples, and we had one buyer of a good, like apples. And we had one seller of oranges and we had one buyer of oranges. So we had a situation where on the selling side, we have a monopoly, only one firm providing apples, for example. And on the buyer side, we only have one buyer, and that's what's called a monopsony. Okay, so that's the counterpart to monopoly. One buyer in a market represents one consumer, represents a monopsony. All right, well, the next step is we said, all right, well, let's expand the consumption side of the market and imagine a situation where we have many, many consumers. Let's put that together with a monopoly like this. We have one firm supplying the market with many, many consumers of the product at the same time. Let's take a look and see how firms would decide how to maximize profit and what price would come about and so forth and so on. Okay, in the next step, we said, okay, well, let's expand the monopoly to not just one firm, but two firms. And even think about what if there's several firms operating against in the market supplying a particular product. And in that case, we're talking about this setup. We've got a small number, maybe just two, a duopoly we would call it. I'm supplying many, many, many consumers in the product market. Okay, and that was the next step we did. And then the last step, what we've been doing in the last few lectures, prior to the midterm and after the midterm, is we've been saying, let's imagine we have perfect competition. Many, many, many firms supplying a product to many, many consumers in the market, right? And in the process of that step by step, we were able to evaluate, well, what are the impacts of expanding the amount of competition that prevails in the marketplace? Now, we passed over this one situation where you've got an oligopsony. I'll just mention that briefly. That would be a small number of buyers in the market. So there's some unevaluated market situations that we haven't looked at too carefully. That's okay. We've got enough to go on, and we're going to go forward and think now, well, what were the major results we got from this step-by-step analysis that we've done? All right, so here's a quick summary of the welfare effects of rising competition. So I call it supply competition because we've got more supply, more firms coming into the marketplace and supplying a particular product, starting from monopoly, then duopoly, to then perfect competition. And as we take each one of those steps towards increasing competition, we get that profits in the individual firms, the incumbent firms that were originally there, those profits are going to go down. Firms will make less and less money as a result of increased competition. As a result, firms don't like competition in general. And we're going to see today they come up with all sorts of ways to respond to that competition in their individual market. Okay, more on that in a minute. New entrants, however, the new firms that are entering the market, they're better than not being in the market, or else they wouldn't have entered. So they're happy to participate and to increase competition. So new entering firms are good. Incumbent firms, the ones that have been there already, are going to lose out as a result of that increased competition. Now, once a new entrant is there for a while, they too are going to want to prevent competition from taking place as well, because they're quickly going to become an incumbent. Consumers of the product, they're better off with more competition. The more firms there are, the better, because more firms bring prices down, and that's going to be good for consumers. Consumer surplus will go up. Consumers are better off. And then we evaluated the overall market outcome, which is a really important point. We can do that with our economic models. We can figure out what's the sum total effect. There's some winners, there's some losers. What's the overall effect? We found that moving from monopoly to oligopoly to then perfect competition, the overall market welfare is steadily increasing. And that means we're getting more and more benefits, if you will, happiness bursts that are being distributed amongst more people, the more competition there is within the marketplace. If we're interested in maximizing the overall well-being of an entire society, competition is a candidate for consideration. Now, I want to highlight a couple of terms that I throw out from time to time, and I just want to be very careful to define these terms. So AKA means also known as competition restrictions now we're talking. So what if we restricted competition in one way or another? We can talk about that as creating a monopoly. You're moving in the direction of monopoly, and so we could call that monopolizing behavior. Or what's sometimes used in economics is to talk about trying to gain monopoly power. And monopoly power means You're not quite a monopoly, but you're moving in that particular direction. You're able to capture more of the market, control the price, raise it so as to increase your profitability. You've still got some other competitors out there, but not as many as you would have in perfect competition. So gaining or increasing your monopoly power is, again, a term used to move in the direction of more monopoly. And what happens as you restrict competition now? Well, prices are going to tend to rise with the restriction of competition, and output is going to fall. That's one of the lessons we learned from the models. That's what a firm would do to maximize their profitability, right? Now, what also happens? Well, economic efficiency is reduced. That's the notion of market welfare that we're using. So firms may not produce at minimum cost under a monopoly. Their costs might be increased a little bit, and consumers can't buy as much as they would because of the higher prices. So we're losing both productive efficiency and consumption efficiency as a result of the restrictions in competition, and that's why market welfare goes down. Right? With the restriction of competition again. Again, I'm talking about competition restrictions on this slide. Now, firms, as a result of restricting competition, they make extra profit. But we have a term for that that's sometimes used in economics. We call them economic rents. And rents sort of supernormal extra profits or extra returns that you're getting because of a special position that you have in the marketplace. The special position in this case is going to be monopolizing behavior or monopoly power. Okay, so monopoly power gives firms extra rents. That's kind of used equivalently to more profit. Okay, but it harms others in the process, right? Because it's hurting consumers in order to do that. And it's also hurting consumers more than it's benefiting the firms who are making these extra rents. That's why market efficiency goes down, or why we say market welfare is reduced. The last thing that competition restrictions do is it inhibits freedom. It inhibits the freedom of new firms to come into the marketplace, firms with new ideas, firms that just want to join the bandwagon and make some profits along with the other firms. That freedom is often restricted purposefully, we're going to see, as a result of firms' behavior and government behavior in the marketplace sometimes. Okay, and also consumers have less freedom as well because they're restricted from purchasing what they might have otherwise in a perfectly competitive market because the prices are going to be higher whenever there is monopoly power in a particular marketplace. Okay, so highlighting the effects of restrictions in competition and also identifying the motivation for it is that firms that are in the industry are going to do better if you can restrict competition. As a result of that simple principle, we look at the world around us, we can find numerous examples of firms trying to restrict competition in their marketplace so as to increase their profitability. Firms will tell us and tell people all the time, business needs to succeed. We need to make more money. If we can restrict competition, that's a good thing because now they're not going to say that we're going to make more money. So they have to find something else to say instead. So what they'll normally say is, it's going to create jobs. It's going to create jobs for the little people. They're going to make more money too because we're going to have more jobs if we make more profits and business is more successful. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. Some of the rhetoric that gets used to try to convince people that restrictions on competition in order to enhance business profitability is a good thing. We'll talk a little bit about that. What happens to the rest of us if competition is restricted in a particular market? Well, consumer surplus is going to go down and overall market welfare is going to go down because of these restrictions on competition.